just, all my classes are recorded. If you can never make it Tuesdays at 1, you could just text me afterward and I'll send you the recording. Sometimes they're fun to listen to randomly in the middle of the night. Maybe, I don't know. I think so. But, if you're in the mood, just let me know. So the reason I wanted to teach class is because when I was, when I was reading the Parashah this week, I'm like, wait, we're not going to talk about this Parashah. There's so much to talk about. And not only that, I guess whenever I take a little break from teaching, some stuff builds up. And what's been building up for me a lot in the past couple of days, as everybody knows, last week was the National Holocaust Remembrance Day. I always have like weird feelings about the different Holocaust Remembrance Days that happen and the fact that they don't all happen at the same time. There's the national one, and then we have Tisha B'Av, where we as Jews do a lot of that stuff. And then there's also Yom HaShoah, and we have all these different days. Sometimes I feel like if everybody could just sort of remember it at once, there might be more impact. But I do think it's even better maybe that there are these multiple points of entry that people have to think about it. And I know I'm not alone. I hope I'm not alone in feeling what we've been feeling, a growing sentiment, I would say, for the last couple of years, but maybe it's been more consistent than that. Certainly for me, it's been over the last maybe 2 years of this rising tide of anti-Semitism. I definitely feel that the pandemic, and I know everybody knows this, that the pandemic has done a lot of awful things to the world, certainly, a lot of awful things on a personal level, but as Jews, it has also, inspired the development of people alone in their homes, isolated from a community, sort of finding information on the internet or inside of their own heads, and what we all know, the rise of conspiracy theories. In that rise, what I noticed during the Capitol riots, where we all saw that in those Capitol riots, of course, there's random people wearing Auschwitz sweatshirts, and I say of course sarcastically, where why is it that whenever something radical is happening, because then I thought back to the summer and the BLM riots and whatever was happening then. Again, there was this sense that in the midst of these riots, on the left and on the right, there are anti-Semites. And I'm sure for many people that's, it's obvious, but for me, it's quite horrifying that wherever you find extremism, and it doesn't matter what they're being extremists about or what that is coming from, that in it, you're going to find somewhere this underpinning of anti-Semitism in the thinking. It's scary, it's frightening, it's extraordinary in a way. But the heart of it is that for millennia, that behind all fringe thinking and conspiracy thinking, there lies this underpinning, the original conspiracy theorist, which is that it's all about the Jews. Now, what scared me this week, I think, did you all hear about the Jewish space laser? Did you all hear about this, the representative? If you didn't, there's this, I forgot, I'm sorry, I think her name is Green. She's an elected official who presented this idea that it wasn't even this year. She said this a year ago, that the fires in California were due to a space laser, which is crazy, okay, that was funded by the Rothschilds. And, so what happened was that it became like, now it's being brought to light. She's a Republican, so the Democrats are bringing it to light, I guess, to oust her. But, it's being brought to light, and it became a funny joke on Instagram and on like in the meme verse, like, oh, a Jewish space laser. And last night I was Googling it, and I read this article, I think it was from the New Yorker. And I turned to my husband, I said, this is the most horrifying article I ever read, because it was seemingly sympathetic and making fun of her and saying, isn't she so stupid? But it was also making it into a very big joke. And I didn't think it was a funny joke at all. I didn't think there was anything funny about any part of this. It's not funny. And the reason I was scared that people were making it into a joke is it really minimizes the severity of what's going on, which is that anti-Semitism, honestly, is not a joke. It's a real issue and deserves real accountability, not mockery, but accountability. And it's what's interesting to me is that then this morning, I Googled it again, and I don't know if I would say pleased to see, but I noticed right away that in the Times of Israel, somebody had written the exact same feelings that I was feeling, which was interesting to hear. He said, why is everybody, it's the same as making fun of somebody, of a blood libel. These are not funny things. Unfortunately, and I hate to say it because we have enough to be anxious about and enough with anxiety, honestly, like I'm so over it, but unfortunately it is an anxious time to be a Jew in the world. And there is a lot happening, and it does demand a reaction. It does demand a call to action on our parts, right? The issue I then had was that I've been noticing. So here's what I'm feeling. I feel that definitely over the months and the past year, maybe longer, there's been this rising tide of friction, of polarization, and with it, extremism. I know that from from my entire life, I would say that if I had to say what I stand for is I stand for the fighting against extremism in any form that it takes, always. And it was the way I was raised was to be alert to signs that somebody is an extremist, to signs that somebody is not thinking logically, is not allowing reason to dominate the way that they act in this world. To be alert to people who are very black and white thinkers, and to know that there's a danger in black and white thinking. So I'm sensitive to that, and I'm always a proponent of moderation, for sure. So how, if you're a proponent of, so this, I'm sorry if I'm monologuing, but how, if you're a proponent of moderation, and if you say extremism is unhealthy, right? How then do you also have a call for action? And this has been the problem with moderates always, is that they're not great at rising to action, because frequently their energy is given to calming things, right? To saying, well, let's listen to each other, let's hear each other. So if I, as a moderate, am saying it is time for a call to action, right? It means that I would like intense, and I would say extreme reactions on the part of the Jewish community to the rising time of anti-Semitism that's happening. That it's time to use our voices, to use our votes, to use our energies, to know that any passivity right now is in a way inexcusable. But at the same time, I want people to be thinking before they act, to be reasoning before they act, to be aware of how delicate these balances are. That if you become an extremist as you're trying to respond to extremism, you risk losing the battle. It's so difficult. It's so difficult. I was thinking about looking at the world and how I'm seeing that the loudest voices right now, and frequently, are these very emotional voices. These voices that are not really grounded in a healthy perspective, and they're being listened to because everybody does feel that something needs to happen. So those voices, when they're happening, we say, yes, we need to do something. But what if that voice is not reasonable, and is not logical, and is not thinking things through? These are the fears that I have. Anybody else feeling, am I alone in this? Any responses before, because I'm going to turn it into the Torah in a minute. Anybody want to pipe in?
Esther, I read about the woman, Marjorie, the one with the laser.
Yeah.
You cannot believe what she's saying is real, and that people are believing her.
Yeah.
It's the conspiracy theories. People believe it.
And I think something for us to think about is how frequently, that's what I'm saying. If you hate a conspiracy theorist, please do not be a conspiracy theorist, right? That's something that's been frustrating me. You are able to spot a conspiracy theory as a Jew from a mile away. We unfortunately bear the burden of being history's watchdogs. We really are. No one is in a better position to recognize when the world is losing their mind than the Jewish people, because we have witnessed it over and over again. It is always directed at us for whatever reason. Maybe this is our role. I don't want it to be. I'm sick of it. But it's fascinating that we are so sensitized to it. We definitely have PTSD. I know we do. We definitely suffer from a level of hypochondria around it to a degree, but necessarily so. If you keep getting sick, it makes sense that you're worried about getting sick, and everybody, when somebody says, you can't be such a hypochondriac, okay, but we keep getting sick. Yeah, maybe you have to be on alert, right? So, well, I guess what frustrates me is how quick people are to notice certain insanities, but not necessarily spotting when somebody is saying something equally insane. It's pleasant because it's the insanity that sounds better to you, maybe. But you have to recognize conspiracy theories. You have to shut down all conspiracy theories if you don't want conspiracy theorists to take control of the world, right? You gotta fight that also. Any other words for me about this issue? Any other thoughts right now that you're having? Am I right to say that are people feeling anxious about this right now? Yes? Are people feeling like, I need to do something? Hi, Mommy, go for it.
Hi, I just want to say one other part of it is like, let's say you do decide that you're going to fight this woman's words and whatever, you call attention to her, and more people join her circle because of no rational reason, except that now it's getting publicity. So we fight a battle on both sides. If we don't say anything, we're wrong. If we do say something, it may become more public and more out there, and then become more people get drawn to these kind of things. So what do we do about that?
I agree with you, Mommy. The problem I find in myself, the problem of not knowing how and when to respond, not knowing where to respond. I'm very good at knowing who's responding incorrectly, right? But how am I using my voice? How am I using my energies is a huge problem. And I agree with you. Where do you go from here? Do you call more attention to it? Do you not? She's not somebody I could personally vote into and out of office, right? So what how do I use my energies? A lot of the time, I do think we have to use financial energy. We have to use political energy. But these are delicate and nuanced things. Jamie, did you want to say something? Jamie Dweck, I saw you unmuted yourself, but maybe it was an accident. Any other thoughts to share?
On that note, Esther, I also, when I hear and I haven't heard the story that you said and all that, but my thought is always, well, sometimes are we being a little too sensitive? The boy who cried wolf type syndrome, right? I mean, look, take de Blasio early this year, just as an example, and he railed against the Hasidim and all that about are we to now fight against it? Well, this is anti-Semitic and all that. Yet, maybe what they were doing wasn't so, I don't always see it as a black and white issue, like pick your battle type thing.
I agree with you. I think part of the issue that I've been having is, as I've said, you to fight extremism with extremism is not healthy because it actually ruins your cause. If every single time somebody says anything about Jews that you don't like, you call it anti-Semitism, you erase your voice to a degree, right? If you're not good at, right, I was frustrated. First of all, I do think there were anti-Semitic aspects to New York, to the way New York responded to Jews during the coronavirus. I do. I think it got out of hand. I think the way that he put certain pictures up, the way it was on the front page, there was the front page of the New York Times has to be about a rabbi in Israel that they just there's something off about that, right? You got to see those signs. At the same time, you got to be accountable as a community for the decisions you're making. If you're going to fly in the face of science and of reason and of what people are telling you is healthy and safe, don't then turn around and say, how dare you, right? There's a balancing act here that we need to have. And if we lack it, unfortunately, we stand in a very delicate place as Jews. So I hear you, it's hard, I think if you always call things anti-Semitic, it's a problem. However, if you don't know the difference between saying that it's a problem if Hasidim have 10,000 people at a wedding, and somebody saying Jewish space lasers caused a wildfire, right? Then you're really in an unwell society, right? Those are two radically different things. One is an elected member of the US government espousing overtly anti-Semitic conspiracy theory comments. And another one is something unsafe just happened in Borough Park. Can you be better at it, right? But it's delicate and we have to be careful and we have to know when to use our voices and how. Like I said, I am going to turn to the Torah in a minute because I do think that in this parasha, not that there are answers, but there are interesting things to notice. Raquel, what were you going to say? Raquel Mizrahi, you there? Did I freeze? Did she freeze? Somebody froze. Okay, Raquel, you could pop in when you're ready. Anybody else? Yeah, Sharon, go for it.
I think some conspiracy theories are worth looking into. Do you know, like in Iran, it's a conspiracy theory that like they say to their people, could you imagine 6 million, like they think that's a conspiracy, like that it's so outrageous to them that they teach their people that it's a conspiracy theory. So I think it's fair to say that not everything that might sound outrageous to you isn't necessarily true.
So Sharon, thank you. Perfect segue. Because, I wrote down in my notes, right, that where I find the apps, what I find happening is when there's an absence of intelligent leadership, right, each individual feels that it is their responsibility to become their own expert. And I think we all know that that's been happening to us a lot recently. I hope you recognize that. And we all go around saying, who are we going to listen to? Who are we supposed to listen to? And underneath that is this deep distrust of knowing where to get accurate information and data and facts and reason and rationality, and a sense that anything could possibly be true. We are living in a moment of history where many people believe that anything could possibly be true. And the lack of an ability to really locate ourselves with this is true and this is false. And I've given many classes about this, usually around Tisha B'Av, because I talk about the rise of the Holocaust and how Holocaust scholars say that what the Nazi regime tried to do was actually to bend people's perception around what is real and what is not real. Their propaganda machine was very strong. And ultimately, people became confused first and then followed insanity second. Confusion is first, insanity is second, right? So a lot of very manipulative people will purposely work hard to destabilize information technology as a way of confusing a society. It's the first step, because if you confuse a society enough, then a crazy voice can come in and tell you crazy things, right? And a layperson actually will be put in a position of not knowing what the hell is going on. Not because we're dumb, not because we're not doing our due diligence, because we literally do not know who to trust and who to turn to for information. Does that make sense? Yeah. And it's scary, and it's what's happening. Stephanie.
It's funny because before you said that, I was thinking about what's going on with Twitter and Facebook and all these people who are not sticking to the truth and who are saying any speech is free speech, and what they're allowing to propagate on their sites, YouTube, everywhere. And I think that's also scary.
I think, listen, we're having a reckoning as a society with the social media that we created, which has many beautiful and healthy aspects to it, but which we have realized, not recently, it's been going on, is deeply unhealthy and has allowed every voice to be an equal voice. Now, I'll just say as an English major, this has bothered me for about a decade. When bloggers started having a voice as a writer, something that bothered me is that everything became art all of a sudden. Everybody was a poet. And I love poetic expression, and I love that people get to write and it's beautiful. Do it, have your blog, but not all of you are great poets. But I'm just putting it out there, okay? And where was the critical eye and the lens? This is something that bothered me about modern literature. I'm gonna be really honest with you guys. A lot of modern literature is nonsense. And I'm saying, and I feel that I have the expertise to announce something like that because I'm a student of literature and I've read it all. And I feel like what that trains you to do is distinguish between, you know, the people who really have talent and people who are just expressing themselves, which is lovely, but I don't necessarily have to canonize that or teach it or applaud it, right? As great art. And it's been something that's bothered me for a really long time. And now it's the same with information. You know, everybody is a professional reporter. No, you're not. Everybody is a scientist. You're not. You're not a scientist. You don't have the training. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm glad that you noticed that your grandmother and your aunt and your uncle all got COVID in this way. You're still not a scientist, okay? You have anecdotal evidence. Please don't tell your family whether they should wear masks or not based on what happened to you and your friends when you were sitting around a table. It's not the best way forward, right? There is something to be said for people with certain level of expertise, knowledge, evidence. These things are still exist in the world, okay? But they've been tainted to the point where it's hard to figure it out. Why am I saying all this? It's 1:24, we'll talk Torah. It's not a direct correlation, I know it's not. But I think a lot about Moshe all the time. Because when we're reading the Torah, there's such clarity that Moshe is the wise leader of the moment. What the Torah never hesitates to show you is that no one at the time thought that they could trust Moshe. Over and over again, his voice is doubted. His voice gets marginalized by others. The people rebel against him. Parashat Beshalach is the story repeatedly. You know, here's some of this, you know, let me just read you some of the scenes, right? You know, this is the beginning of Beshalach. We know what's happening, just to place yourself. They are out of Egypt. They have to take the long way to Israel because there are dangers along the road that they're not ready for, God says, right? And they come to the crossing of the Yam Suf, the Reed Sea, not the Red Sea, and Paro is behind them, and the sea is in front of them, and they cry out and they say to Moshe, "Was it for want of graves in Egypt that you brought us to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, taking us out of Egypt? Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt, saying, 'Let us be, and we will serve the Egyptians, for it's better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness'?" I don't know how you react to when they say this to Moshe. Unfortunately, I find that a lot of readers of the Torah are overly judgmental and critical of Bnei Israel at this moment. They're just like, how could they, after all the miracles, you know, say that or doubt that? And there was just the 10 plagues, right? And it is something interesting to think about, which is that they were living in a time of overt miracles. Overt miracles were happening. How many signs do you need that Moshe is a great leader? What I love about the Torah is it almost lets go of all of that and places you inside of the realities of human history, which is, don't ever think that the path was so clear and that people knew what to do and they knew who to follow and they knew who to listen to. It was never the case. Never the case, even in the time of Moshe, even in the time of a great leader, and even in a time of overt miracles, right? The idea that Bnei Israel would want to go back to Egypt, and I'll call it a conspiracy theory that they espouse over and over again, that life is better in Egypt than it is in the desert or in Israel. With our 2020 vision, we laugh at them a lot. Do you know what does anybody know what I'm talking about? Almost that that mockery. instead of mocking them, become them in the historical moment. And let's think, what could we learn? If I am an Israelite living inside of a historical moment, right? Who do I listen to? Who do I turn to? So what they turn to, first of all, is a lot of fear, right? The fear of the unknown will always trump the fear of the known. That's a given in human personality. The idea that yes, it's not great, but it's too scary to think of the alternative. We understand, we know. But what I think is actually quite sensitive is that this is the first of many incidents in this parasha. It's going to be here. The next scene is going to be 1 second later. Literally, the Torah doesn't even have a bridge. It's they sing Shirat Hayom, and then there's no water, and they're upset again, and they don't know what to do, and they say it immediately after. It doesn't even give them a second. They come out. I'm looking at my Tanakh. They keep walking, and then there's no water to drink, and they start grumbling and complaining against Moshe and against God. What are we supposed to do? And the next scene, again, they don't have food to eat, and they start complaining. And then again, there's no water, and they say again, wish we were in Egypt, right? So it's not as if there's any moment where their minds are suddenly changed and they're suddenly in this new historical belief system. The response of the Torah through Moshe is interesting. First of all, it's never judgmental. It really isn't. At least in the Sefer Shemot, you're going to see a different tone in Bimidbar. We could talk about that at a different time. There's really a constant sensitivity to the fact that this is very difficult for Bnei Israel, that of course, this is not going to be a natural transition for them, and that Moshe's role is going to be to soothe their fears rather than condemn them for their fears, to acknowledge the fear, to acknowledge the discontentment, and then to respond with education. Now, a lot of people think that Moshe responds with water and with food. But if you read this parasha carefully, you discover that's not the response at all. What the response is, for example, when they're very afraid, I always say this is very fascinating. Moshe turns to God and he says, what are we going to do? What should we do? That we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Vayomer Adonai al Moshe, ma titzak elai? Why are you crying out to me? Daber el bnei Israel v'yista'u. Talk to Bnei Israel and move forward. I've never understood it. I talk about it every year. But I am inspired by it because I think it's God's way of saying, teach them, lead them forward, show them the path through the water. There is a path through the water. I'm going to help you once you start. But you always have that example of the rabbis of Nachshon ben Nadav, where you as human beings are going to have to take a leap that feels dangerous before you're going to find that Ezra, right? And so he leads them forward. He tells them, listen, we're not alone in this world. We're not fighting this by ourselves. Don't ever believe that the forces of evil are stronger than the forces of good. If you believe that, you lose. If you believe that the forces of good are more powerful, that logic is more powerful, that reason is more powerful, that mitzvot are more powerful, then believe it. Then act upon those things. And that's the message. When they complain about the water in the next scene, interestingly, what he does is, we know the scene. He throws a piece of wood into the water, vayimtaku hamayim, the water becomes sweet. And then it says, Sham sam lo chok u'mishpat v'sham nisahu. Here he made for them a fixed rule, and he tested them, and he said, if you, vayomer im shamoa tishma l'kol Adonai Elohecha, v'hayashar be'enav ta'aseh, v'hazanta l'mitzvotav, v'shemata el kol chukatav, kol hamachala asher samti b'mitzrayim lo asim alecha ki ani Adonai rofecha. He says, listen, I'll tell you what the cure is. The cure to your illnesses is going to be a steadfast and dedicated commitment to Torah and mitzvot. A steadfast and dedicated commitment to it, unwavering. And when you do that, all of a sudden, it's Moshe's job to show them that Torah mitzvot, and in that way, he nourishes their water. It's not about water. It's about the way he's going to nourish them with Torah. Next scene, they're hungry, and he gives them man. We know that man it's called dew from heaven. They're going to have to figure out how to survive on the food from the skies. It's so clearly symbolic, but even if you reject the symbolism of it and you want to think about it literally, it doesn't become about man. This scene actually becomes about Shabbat. It becomes a scene about, here's how you're going to eat. But the issue with the eating is, all of a sudden it becomes about, well, what are we supposed to do on Friday? There's a double portion, and then we ate it, and we went to collect on Saturday, and we couldn't. And Moshe says, oh, you know what you have to learn about man? There'll be sustenance for 6 days, and you have to trust that you don't have to collect food on the 7th day, that you can rest, that you can let go. If you could trust in Shabbat, you will be nourished, right? And I think all the time about how the world constantly recognizes that if there was a true Sabbath, we talk about a lot, that it would help the world survive better, right? Especially with the technology that we're using today, that if we don't exit the narrative once a week and silence the phones, how sick we are becoming by the constant barrage, right? And it moves on to the next order, where actually it becomes about a question that Bnei Israel have. And the question is, Hayesh Adonai b'kirbeinu im ayin? Is God really with us or not? And in the midst of asking that, so we find out Bnei Israel is not really asking, is there water for us to drink? What they're really asking is there a God? And does that God care about us? And the next scene is going to be that Amalek is going to try to destroy them. And because if you've learned this ever, just know it now, if I'll repeat it again. Amalek clearly steps in when Bnei Israel is at its weakest, not physically, but spiritually. And that spiritual weakness is, where are we in this world? What are we supposed to be doing? Where are we supposed to go with this? And in that moment, the extremists, the violent people, the anti-Semites, they step in, they cause havoc and violence. And the response of the Torah is, where are you putting your eyes? Where are you putting your trust? Where are you getting your knowledge and information from? And Moshe will lift up his hands, and the battle is going to be won and lost by the degree to which they could turn towards Moshe's commitment to this idea of Torah mitzvot. Where do I take all of this? As Jews, it's not a great answer, I know, because what we get to is, okay, there's 1 million rabbis, and they're all supposed to be representative of the leadership of Torah and mitzvot, right? And yet, some of us are leading us in one direction, some of them are leading us in another direction, and there's mixed messages around how we're supposed to follow the Torah and how we're supposed to engage with the mitzvot, and where do we go with all of this? My answer is complicated. One thing I want to say is, are you really tuning in deeply to what the Torah teaches, right? The core ideologies of the Torah. A lot of those core ideologies are about things that we talk about every week, which is, it's a rejection of violence. It's a rejection of impetuousness. The Torah constantly says that the mitzvot at their heart are filled with knowledge. That when people outside of the Torah see the mitzvot enacted correctly, they say, wow. As Jews, if we're not constantly checking in with, what? Are we authentic with the way we engage with other human beings? Are we really leading in our relationships with other people, which is, I would say, 80% of the Torah is about how do you relate to other human beings? Are you constantly relating to other human beings with violence, with anger, with resentment, with hatred. If Jews, when they're talking to each other, have not figured out how to have a reasonable conversation with one another, are they really enacting Torah and mitzvot? I'm asking you that sincerely, because if you think that in responding to these threats and to anti-Semitism and to this global pandemic, if the voices you're listening to are asking for things that you know in your heart are not Torah values, which are about Tselem Elokim, they're about reason and logic, they're about holiness and sacredness, right? And that's why it's very hard for me when people say, are you a Democrat or a Republican? I have no idea as Jews what they're talking about. I don't understand Jews who speak in those terms, because Jews are, what we're fighting for, what we should be fighting for, is goodness and morality and the ethics of the Torah. So I'm not going to reject social justice because the Democrats have co-opted it and maybe corrupted some of it, because we stand for social justice. And I'm not going to reject personal responsibility just because the Republicans stand for small government and people owning their own choices. I'm not going to reject something that a Republican stands for just because they're a Republican if it has to do with the sanctity of family life, right? Because from the Torah standpoint, we do believe in that sanctity. And there are things Democrats believe in that I agree with, and there are things Republicans believe in that I agree with. And if you're going to become an extremist American, rather than an extreme Jew and an extreme Torah learner, you're going to get lost, right? When you're listening to voices on Instagram, on Facebook, in the news, are you able to filter that through a Jewish lens, a Torah lens, which is not what would Trump do or what would Biden do, right? What would Moshe say? What would the Torah say about this? The Torah is screaming to you every week. When you're listening to a religious leader, do you feel that their voice embodies the values and the messages and the morals of the Torah? Not just do they embody the halachic path, which many of them do, right? But do they, beyond halacha, embody the moral and ethical teachings? Can they do both? This is very delicate. This is very nuanced, but you have to look for it. If somebody seems to embody halacha, but they speak hate and they speak extremism, beware. Because Moshe, even as he escapes from the Egyptians, tells Bnei Israel, it is not your job to hate Egyptians. I think it's fascinating. We leave Egypt and we're taught, don't hate them, escape from them, don't be them. But you don't have to spend your life being angry at them or hating them. We're done with it. We exited it, okay? Even Amalek, it's not about hatred. It's about, will you always remember to reject the teachings of Amalek, which are the teachings of when people are weak, when people are in doubt, use them, leverage them so that you can get what you want. Prey on weakness. If you know anyone who's doing that, reject them. If you see a civilization who's preaching that, reject them. I know it's challenging and difficult. I know I've been spoiled, I think, because honestly, I'll speak about him. My rabbi is Rabbi Shammah, and I have never in my life had to question his moral, ethical, or halachic standing. He's always been, for me, an emblem. Whenever he speaks slowly and carefully. People get frustrated because they call Rabbi Shammah. I have to tell an anecdote. We bought a food we went to Vermont skiing with my kids. We bought food there and didn't have a marking on it. And my husband were like, wait, it's not kosher. Is it kosher? Call Rabbi Shammah. But it was my son who bought it. So we made my son, my 17-year-old, call Rabbi Shammah on his cell phone. And it was his birthday. So he said, happy birthday. And then he asked him his question and he thought it would be a 2-minute question. Is this kosher? It was a 45-minute phone call. And after we were done with the phone call, we had to call my Uncle Joey, who's on the phone right now. Rabbi Shammah said, why don't you call Joey Bennett? See what he says. So we called my Uncle Joey. And then he said, oh, call your father. And we called my father. It was a 3-hour learning session, which I think is the right thing. Like, rather than giving us an answer, he gave us a very nuanced, detailed halachic approach. And then he said, do further research. Here's what, some things is black and white, but he felt it was nuanced. So he let us know. Every conversation I've had with him, I'll ask him, let's say as principal of a school, I'll say, what do you think? Should we service every kid in the community, or do we have standards? Where do we go with it? It's a conversation with no answer. And that's, for me personally, how I know that I'm following the right leader, because I know he never jumps and he's never quick and he always thinks it through first. And he's so intelligent and so brilliant. And even if I don't agree with everything he says, I know I'm following somebody that's brilliant in all areas of life. That's why I married my husband. I said, wow, he's so good. I look at my father-in-law, what an ethical person. What a moral human being. So scholarly, a professor, but a rabbi also. It's exciting to me. So I think when we're trying to navigate, I want to reject the idea that everything is so confusing and we don't know who to listen to. I reject it. I reject it because I want you to believe that there is Torah out there. And I'll say that you have to believe in the good. You do. That's what the Torah wants you to know. You must believe in the good. You must believe that Hashem exists, that there is a larger pattern here. You must search it out. You must dedicate yourself to finding that truth and having an ear tuned for things that smack of extremism, of hatred, of violence, of Amalek type of talk, of Mitzrayim type of talk. Try to find that nuanced moral voice. I know it's difficult. Aseh l'charav means find a leader you could truly trust. I do that work a lot. I told you, even with this Jewish space laser, I was very proud that my brain said, something doesn't sound right here with the way people are making this into a joke. And I feel like that instinct that I then followed tells me, you know what, Esther, there's something not right going on. Use your voice. It's time to take action. And, my husband started a few different petitions, first against this politician. Second, there's other politicians. I know a petition doesn't do much, but sometimes it's what we have. I don't like the way, there are very strong voices in our community saying, make sure you're a Democrat right now if you're a New Yorker, so that you could vote for people that you believe in. We didn't really do everything intelligently in the last couple of voting cycles, because we're not getting people into office that could really support Jewish causes and the Jewish needs. We reacted emotionally rather than intelligently sometimes. And we have to really work harder at this. I will do everything in my power to try to do that research and be a voice of reason and of inspiration, I hope. And I always get inspired that's why I had to teach today, because I look around at the names on my Zooms always, and I say, wow, there's amazing leadership in this community. All of these people have very strong voices. They're very wonderful and profound thinkers and moral people. And we're raising a generation of very good kids. And I do think it's time to make our voices heard a bit more, with softly, meaning with sensitivity, with love for our fellow Jew, understanding that people want to go back to Egypt and want to reject logic sometimes, but it doesn't mean we stop the conversation. Don't throw your hands up, don't give up, don't say everybody's crazy. And hopefully we push back and we use our energies to make this world a little bit better. All right, thanks everyone. You can unmute yourselves. I'm sorry I was talking for so long. Any thoughts, please just feel free to share.
Thank you, Esther.
Thanks, everyone.
Hi, S. Thanks. Speak to you soon.
Hi, Steph.
Thank you, Esther. It was wonderful.
It was awesome, Esther.
Thank you.
Hi, Mel.
Hi, how are you?
Miss you.
It was awesome.
I was thinking
Thank you,
about
Esther. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, S.
Thank you.
My middle school, they are used
Thank you, Esther.
to
Esther, thank you. You put so many things into words that I've been thinking.
It's such a
Thank you,
hard
thank
time.
you.
Such a hard time. I hope we find our good voice, you know, our good voice, our strong voice.
Why are you making that sound?
Hi, Esther. Do you hear me?
I hear you. Hi.
Hi, because I have my baby in the room. No, I'm thinking a lot about what you're saying. I mean, I love all what you say. In terms of when I teach these middle schoolers in Hillel now, you know, I'm an English teacher this year, and they are used to being spoon-fed answers. Is this the answer? Is that the answer? You know, yes or no. Every day I tell them, you are to think what the answer is. In fact, one day I said, you're the teachers, you're coming up with questions on this book. You are asking me what I should be thinking about on this chapter, like that. And they're like, oh, laughing, oh, this is so easy. By the end of the day, they were like, that was so hard. How do you think of what to ask us every day?
That's
You know,
amazing. I mean, as educators, I think we're having a moment where we're really realizing how much we have to teach critical thinking. It's not even data. It's, are we teaching people how to think and how to think through things? It's very hard to do. I'm telling you, if the leaders are getting lost and confused, imagine a regular 12-year-old who has a phone and is trying to figure out the world. I can't imagine what they're confronting, you know? So you're doing the, I always say the work of the firemen and the policemen and teachers, right? Saving the world.
the work.
Yeah.
No, and whatever we talk about, I mean, I'm lucky English is not so content-based, so I get to work on those skills.
Yeah.
You know, I do try to bring in like history. I'm like, how about all these wars? Adults didn't solve them. Adults created the wars. So let's think about why they happened. And, you know, hopefully history won't repeat itself.
That's amazing. That's so beautiful to hear.
Yeah, I'm having fun with it. But I like your
Good
class.
to see you on Zoom. Yay.
Yeah, because usually I teach all day, but today
I know, I know.
What grade are you teaching in Hillel?
What grade?
What grade?
I teach fifth, like 4 hours in the morning because all the classes. But then, you know, if I'm available and they need me to sub, I do 8, 7.
Good for you. Good for you.